Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Today we are going to talk about the good that happened in the last legislative session. This is going to be a positive episode covering a lot of conservative policy that grassroots conservatives have worked hard to pass. It will be followed next week with the bad and then followed again by the ugly. So the good, the bad, and the ugly of the legislative session. These are going to be 3 weeks of an honest conversation with you Texans about what actually happened. And today we're going to focus on the things that you should be grateful for and the things you should recognize were accomplished because of the work that conservatives have done in the state of Texas. Let's get to this show. There are a lot of politicians who will come back and email everybody out and say that this session was the most conservative gathering of lawmakers that has ever existed in any lawmaker gathering in the history of the universe, of the nation, of the state, since humanity was created in Genesis. That will be made, that assertion. And it will mirror the same assertion made 2 years ago, and 2 years before that, and 2 years before that, and 2 years before that, and you will quickly realize, and for those of you who have been following politics for a decade in Texas or longer, you kind of realize it doesn't matter what they pass. Every session is the most conservative session ever, right? They could kill 100 conservative bills. They could kill 10. They could kill 50. They could kill 500. As long as they pass something that's conservative, they will say this is the most conservative session ever. Now, I do not support that framing because it's inaccurate. It's dishonest. What is better to do is to have an honest conversation about what are the good things that happened. Next week, what are the bad things? And next week, what are the ugly things? And the way I'm breaking that up in my mind, just so y'all know, is good policy today, bad. Ugly is like obvious wins. They were so easy, we shouldn't have messed them up. Okay. A bad is going to be good policy that died. That being said, an important thing to also focus on and acknowledge is that there are some people out there who will say nothing good happened this session. And I saw that. I saw that in late May, early June, people saying this is the worst session ever. We got nothing. Conservatives got nothing out of the session. And that's also highly inaccurate. And the reason it's highly inaccurate is because a lot of the things I'm going to go through today that we passed this session were things that we've criticized Republicans for killing last session. So if it is true that Republicans in the Texas House killed a ban on China land ownership last session, and that all those same Republicans went around and said, we had the most conservative session ever, even though they were literally protecting the Chinese Communist Party. That is true. And it is true that when that bill hit the House floor, Republicans did work to kind of try to soften it up in some ways, some of the leadership Republicans. And we had to strengthen it. But the truth is that the ultimate bill that passed is a very strong ban on China land. I would argue one of the strongest in the nation. And if we're going to say that it was wrong for Republicans to kill the bill 2 years ago, and that's one of the reasons it wasn't a good session, we have to acknowledge it is a good thing that it passes. So if anybody's out there saying nothing good happened, conservatives didn't get anything this session, they're simply not being honest. It's the same extreme of the most conservative session ever. These two people are living in the same false realities. It's just kind of the opposite sides of the pendulum. Okay, so let's start down a list. What are the good things that happened this session? And the only thing I'll do to set the stage is to tell you that conservatives won more victories over the last year through the political process than we've ever won. And that meant that the legislature as a whole was moving further to the right than it had ever moved. And so the raw amount of votes that were all throughout the legislature that were willing to push things to a more conservative direction, not only in the primary, but even in the general election where we had a more conservative Senate and House than we'd ever had, set the stage and created an environment where it was easier to pass this and harder to kill these things. And those are things that many of you should take credit for. You donate to organizations, you volunteer, you show up, you give certain portions of your time, talent, and treasure towards moving Texas to the right. And that is one of the reasons we were able to achieve some of the policy victories we were able to achieve. So let's go down the list. The first one I will start with is the China land ban, SB 17. This bill passed the Senate, came to the House. It actually became a stronger bill in the House. So it got strengthened in many respects. And then got weakened by what's called the Shaheen Amendment. I did an episode on this. Y'all can go back and follow it. But the good news that you need to understand is that the Shaheen Amendment, which said, hey, if you're here on a student visa, if you're just traveling, you're a non-immigrant, you're a member of the CCP that is loyal to the CCP, you can buy a ranch next to an Air Force base. That's a little crazy. That got significantly chopped down in conference to where SB 17 in its final form that passed, in spite of some moderate Republicans who tried to water it down, ended up being perhaps one of the strongest China land bans in the nation. All of these bills are being contested in court, and so there is this dance you're playing where you're trying to make as good and strong a bill as possible that will also withstand legal scrutiny and will be fully upheld, because some of the states that have passed bans are not even being upheld now because there are certain things in them that the courts deemed unconstitutional. I disagree with the courts on that, and we should stop listening to the unconstitutional court systems, but that is neither here nor there. SB 17 China land is a strong victory, and you should be very proud. China land this session was the sex change surgery ban of last session, meaning it was so painful for Republicans to go back to their districts and explain how they killed it, the same way it was 4 years ago when they were explaining why they killed a ban on sex change surgeries for kids, that by the time they came back this session, they knew they were going to pass it. Last session they knew they were going to pass a sex change surgery ban on children. It was just about whether it would be strong or not. And you have to understand that those conservative warriors that you elected, Brent Money and Andy Hopper and Mike Alcott and Shelley Luther and all these different people, if I didn't mention you, I'm sorry, because there's a ton of great ones out there fighting. Carissa Richardson, Katrina Pearson, Alan Schoolcraft, David Lowe, these guys are fighting for you. Okay, if I go down the list, I'm going to have to name everyone, so I'm sorry. But they were fighting on the floor to strengthen SB 17. It was going to pass. The question was it going to pass as a strong bill? And it did. Nate Schatzline, Tony Tinderholt, these guys. So that is a huge victory and one that we should be really grateful for. Chinese communists own millions of acres of Texas land, and we need to make sure that over the next several years, that land is handed back to Texans. And then we also need to make sure that none of them ever buy our land again. And we should honestly look at taking that bill and expanding it to other countries as much as possible. It also right now affects Iran, North Korea, Russia. I don't know how many Russians or North Koreans are buying Texas land. Chinese nationalists are, but that just is what it is. When it comes to the issue of gun rights, we had a very successful session of all the different kind of specific issues. Gun rights was probably the most successful legislative session. And we've come a long way on this issue. You have to understand that if you rewind 6, 8, 10 years ago, over the last 10 years, there have been times that gun groups disagreed with our governor on an issue, disagreed with the lieutenant governor on an issue, disagreed with the House that killed a lot of gun bills. So it has taken a long time to get to where we are. But right now, our governor, lieutenant governor, and the Texas House of Representatives are, based on their results that they delivered, strong supporters of the Second Amendment, and you should be very grateful for that. Texas Gun Rights has a great just graphic. You can go to their Twitter and just pull it up. It's at the top of their Twitter, but it just says bill passage. Senate Bill 1362 was the Anti-Red Flag Law Act passed by Representative Cole Hefner and Senator Brian Hughes. SB 1596 was the short barrel rifle decriminalization. Right now, short barreled rifles, just a rifle that has a shorter barrel, it's a criminal act for you to own one of those. We removed that crime. SB 706 was universal reciprocity by Senator Schwartner and Representative Carrie Isaac. This just says we're going to recognize any and all license to carries and stuff in the state of Texas. So there's going to be universal reciprocity for anybody who's coming into Texas. There was a gun buyback ban passed by State Representative Wes Friedel and Senator Bob Hall. That's HB 3053 that just says cities cannot have gun buybacks. And the Democrats were really mad about this bill on the floor. They complained about it because we are telling liberal cities, you can't have these programs where you use taxpayer dollars to buy people's guns so they have less guns. I think I'm in favor of the government buying people guns so they understand the importance of the Second Amendment, not buying them back from them. HB 1403 was the Foster Parent Second Amendment privacy protection. And this was passed by Representative Cody Harris and Senator Mays Middleton. Representative Cody Harris has a background in adoption, and so he understands this process. He has several adopted children. And several people who know the process, the foster parenting, know that unfortunately the way Texas has operated, you almost have to give up your Second Amendment rights to foster children. And it's been incredibly problematic. So HB 1403 is something that will really benefit Second Amendment. It will benefit all gun owners in Texas, but specifically the ones who are in the foster system. And it will make it easier for gun owners to participate in the foster system. We want red-blooded American patriots participating in the foster system. And when you tell these people, well, you kind of have to report every single gun you own, and then you have to lose them in a boating accident or something, it makes it a lot more complicated. They have to get a boat to have a boating accident. It's a real issue. Texans for Vaccine Choice did release, for the medical freedom followers out there, 6 medical liberty bills that fully passed this session. HB 1586 by Representative Hull and Lois Kolkhorst, HB 4076 by Representative Leach and Lois Kolkhorst, HB 3441 by Shelley Luther and Bob Hall. That is the bill that says that if you're going to advertise your vaccine, you are now liable for the harm that causes people. There is a federal law prohibiting that. And so we will have to work to undermine that federal law. But now the state of Texas has taken an official position in a great way. HB 4535 by Representative John McQueenie and Kelly Hancock. This has to do with the COVID vaccine. SB 269 by Charles Perry and James Frank, and SJR 34 by Senator Hughes and James Frank, which is a parental rights bill. They don't have the specific explanations of each of these bills, but I will tell you I'll give you a couple of the different examples of what these bills do. So we already talked about the liability bill, but one of the other bills, I believe it's the one by Lacey Hull and Lois Kolkhorst, is one that's going to make it possible for you to print your exemption from home. Right now, to submit your vaccine exemption to public schools is incredibly difficult, and it's designed to be incredibly difficult. This is designed to make it easier for every single parent who has made their own vaccine decisions, hasn't just said, what does Anthony Fauci want? I'll do whatever he says. But parents who actually have thought for themselves, they will have a much easier time getting the exemption to get their kids into school. Representative Leach's bill, carried by Senator Kolkhorst over in the Senate, is one that said you cannot discriminate against someone solely based on their vaccine status for organ transplants. And what y'all might not know, and this is something that Texans for Vaccine Choice deals with on a regular basis, is parents reaching out and saying, my child needs an organ to live, and the hospital will not put them on the transplant list because they're not fully vaccinated. I want you to think about how disgusting that is. We have hospitals in Texas saying we are going to deny this child a life-saving organ because they're not fully vaccinated. That is insane. So this bill deals with that issue. Again, I will talk over the next couple weeks about bills in these areas that died. So there are some gun bills and there are some medical freedom bills that did not pass, and I will focus on those at a later time. But right now I'm going to focus on these bills that did pass and tell you that if you're somebody who cares about vaccine choice, who cares about medical freedom, you were probably frustrated last session when these bills died, right? When all these members came back and said, this is the most conservative session ever, but they killed Lacey Hull's bill and they killed Jeff Leach's bill. There wasn't even a bill filed that was Shelley Luther's bill at the time. They didn't even think about that. But it was the most conservative session ever. Well, guess what? This session, those bills moved and they passed. Often what we try to do is you pick the low-hanging fruit. And what's happened over the last several sessions is they've killed so many things that it's hard to even get the little wins that you should get. And this session, some wins were larger and some wins were smaller, but getting the wins means that you can continue to work up and get larger and larger victories. There were some significant medical freedom bills that did not pass, and we'll talk about the significance of those bills at a later time. But right now, you should know that there were 6 medical liberty bills that passed that you should be really grateful for passed. Secondly, or lastly, fourthly, whatever, I'm trying to keep track of this list of how many things I'm trying to cover today. But next, we have bail reform. And some of you live in rural parts of Texas, and bail reform does not seem like a major problem. But here's what you need to understand. Ultimately, we have arguably thousands of crimes that are committed in Texas that should never, ever, ever happen. Never, ever, ever have happened. And the government is the one that let them happen. Now you might say, well, how is that? How did the government let those thousands of violent crimes happen? And the way they let it happen is that somebody comes before a court who has been accused of a very heinous crime. They raped someone. They murdered someone. They beat someone. There's all sorts of very violent crimes. And judges in Texas, primarily in larger counties, the larger urban counties, are letting these criminals out on very low bail. And not only that, by the way, not only will they let them out on bail, but then that person will go and commit another crime. So let's say somebody in January is arrested for allegedly raping somebody. They come before the judge. The judge says, you can go out on bail. Now that in itself is a problem. When they let them out on bail, by the way, this person goes out and is arrested again 3 months later for a violent crime, assault with a deadly weapon, comes back before the judge. This judge, or these judges in Texas, are letting that criminal out on bail again. They're like, well, we still don't know if you're violent. Nothing's been confirmed. So go back out into the wild. And then these people are going out and committing even more violent crimes. Bail reform was one of Governor Abbott's legislative priorities. And the reason it is because the lack of bail reform is leading to more Texans getting murdered, beaten, and raped than should. Now, no one should get murdered, beaten, or raped. But the reality is that there will never, ever, ever be a society where no violent crime ever happens. And that's not actually what the government is trying to achieve. They can't actually completely reform and change the hearts and minds of every citizen in the state. But what you can do is create an environment where people know that when you do these heinous acts, there is a very, 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 very stiff penalty. We've talked about this on the show with the death penalty and with other things. It's important for Texas to let criminals know that violent crime will be handled by our government violently. And you will have a strong consequence. And right now in many of our urban centers, they know that the judicial system, the criminal justice system, will let them walk. There were a number of bail reform measures that passed: SB 9, SB 40, SJR 5. There were a number of bail reform measures that failed, which we will talk about in future weeks. But I will say that we took a step in the right direction. There is still some very important, very needed bail reform to occur with illegal immigrants and with repeat violent offenders. But we were able to get some wins on bail reform, and we should be grateful for those wins. Representative Andy Hopper, I think, did a very good job sending out an email where he overviewed the Texas legislative priorities. And I'm just going to talk about this because I think Representative Hopper is somebody who's trying to have an honest conversation with the people of Texas. And he took the Texas GOP legislative priorities and put them up to show these are 8 legislative priorities. What did we get done and what did we not get done? Tom Glass also did a good overview of this and has his own opinions. Even Tom Glass and Andy Hopper slightly view the wins and losses differently. And that's just to say, if you know Tom, if you know Andy, they're both patriots. So everyone's trying to kind of wrestle with how much did we or did we not get done this session? And I'll get into that in just a second. But I will go through Representative Hopper's explanation. He basically said he thought we got complete. When I say complete, as you know, a strong amount done for Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids and Texas is Not for Sale, which is the China land ban. He thought we more partially got done securing Texas elections, securing the electric grid, and ending federal overreach. And then he didn't think we accomplished enough for border enforcement, no Democrat chairs, or banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. Now, Tom Glass, I think, did not think we did well enough for Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids, but he thought we got securing the electric grid done. So that would be a distinction, if I recall correctly, from Tom's analysis. It might be worth explaining why there would be even any level of disagreement on some of these things. And so before I go on to the rest of my list of accomplishments, let me explain this. There's always a discussion that happens at the Texas GOP convention. And some of you, in fact, I know many of you who listen to this, go to the Texas GOP convention. You're delegates, you're participants in this process. Some of you have served on the Legislative Priorities Committee, on the Platform Committee, all of these things. When we set up a legislative priority, some of these legislative priorities are as simple as one rule or one bill. Banning taxpayer-funded lobbying is one bill. No Democrat chairs is one rule. Texas is Not for Sale, the China land ban, is a bill. If you pass this bill, you accomplished it. Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids or securing the Texas elections is not one bill. And the reason it's not one bill is because the House would not even let you make it one bill. They would not let you pass one big election integrity bill that did 20 different things. So what happens is you have to break these bills up into 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 bills, and then each of them have to be addressed. One might address for Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids, drag show performances, and one might address library books, and one might address what you can do with kids in school, whether you can talk to them about gender theory, and one might address sex ed, and one might address, curriculum, protecting curriculum, the content. All these are separate bills that go to separate committees on separate issues. And so that's why for some of these issues, it's like a partial win. Now I'm going to give you an example of then how you have to break it down. If I look at the Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids issue, I tend to side with Andy Hopper and saying, I think we should say that that was accomplished. Now, it doesn't mean that no bills died, and we'll get into that in the bad and the ugly, but it means that many of the bills that passed were actually very strong bills. Whereas the securing Texas elections, many of the bills that passed both the Senate and the House, because the House did kill a lot of election integrity, many of the bills that passed were smaller bills. So where with the Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids, the bills that passed were the bigger, stronger bills, and then the ones that didn't pass, it's not saying that it's good that they didn't pass, but they were less significant in my opinion. Where with the securing elections, it was the opposite. The House decided to pass the smaller election integrity reforms while killing the more substantive. And so we'll get into the nuances of that as the weeks go by. But Representative Hopper's analysis is that we fully accomplished Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids. Texas is Not for Sale. And I shouldn't say fully, that's not what he would say, but Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids, that it was accomplished enough and adequately enough to say that it is a green check mark. There were 3 yellow check marks for securing Texas elections, securing the electric grid, and ending federal overreach. And then he feels like we failed when it comes to border enforcement, no Democrat chairs, banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. And I will not get into the failures at this time, but I wanted to explain Texas GOP priorities in general. Now, let's talk about Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids, because I think this is where it gets rather substantive. Senate Bill 12 I believe was the most consequential bill that passed this session. And that is, we have to thank Senator Brandon Creighton, who put this bill together last session. It died and then pushed it again this session. This was not a small bill. I talked to you about how sometimes it's hard to do multiple things in one bill, but Senator Creighton bit off a major chunk when he put together a 45-page bill to deal with a massive amount of issues. Holistically, this bill is designed to both get rid of DEI and CRT from our K through 12 systems. It's not just what you can tell a student. It is how you as a system behave. You can't even have DEI in your hiring practices. You can't have it at all in the K through 12 system. And then it is also designed to get rid of sex and gender from the K through 12 system. What I mean about sex and gender theories, sex and gender radical ideas, is that it removes many of these elements from the system entirely. So it tells teachers, you cannot make these instructions to kids. You are not to ever instruct these children. And oh, by the way, if you are to counsel the kid or do anything with the kid, you are going to have to go get parental consent. So not only does it say there's a bunch of stuff you can't do, it then also says you have to give parents informed consent on a bunch of things that you do. So there's a bunch of things you can't do at all. And then there's other things that you can only do if you really tell parents exactly what to do. I had an emergency episode several weeks ago where I talked about how this bill had been weakened in the House and was going to conference. And when that bill came out of conference, it was fully strengthened back up, not only with adjustments of what the Leach Amendment had been, but also with an insertion of the club ban back in. And let me just tell you this, what we found out with the restoration of that club language, Representative Alan Schoolcraft led the fight on that. Of course, Senator Brandon Creighton put it in his original bill because he knew that these sex clubs that are on our campuses needed to be gotten rid of. What we found out was that Democrats, many of the Democrat lawmakers in Texas were groomed in these very clubs. They were groomed in these very clubs, and they got up and told stories about how they were more aware of their sexuality because of the gender club that they participated in. They were able to experience and express themselves in their gender fluidity because of these clubs. So the ban on those clubs was a massive victory. Massive victory. Senate Bill 12 is the Parental Bill of Rights. That was under Stop Sexualizing Texas Children. Senate Bill 13 allows parents to get dirty books out of school libraries. And I will tell you this, Angela Paxton led the fight on this. She passed a great bill. Brad Buckley pretty much gutted the bill, to be honest. He made it to where the bill was going to create these parental advisory councils that could recommend different books to get rid of. But then he set the bar so high that none of them would ever get created. So Senator Paxton said they have to get created on every school district. Brad Buckley said they can, they don't have to be. And then he said if it was something like 20% of the parents, some astronomically high number that are in the ISD can sign a petition and they can force the parental advisory council to get created, which in like one of Nate Schatzline's school districts would require 1,000 parents of kids to create the parental advisory council. They'd have to find 1,000 signatures from parents in the school just to have it a council that could look to see how much pornography they have in their school libraries. So he did effectively gut the bill. It went to conference. And what they ended up putting in conference was actually essentially an amendment that Brent Money had offered on the floor of the House. And this is just one example of how the conservatives that you all fought to elect when moderates were trying to elect more moderate Republicans were fighting every day to advance more conservative policy. It's not, if SB 13 had passed, but it had been gutted, then I wouldn't be talking about it today. It would probably be on the good or bad episode. I can talk about it on the good episode because it was restored. And one of the reasons it was restored was because Republicans in the Texas House said, we want to make this better. And then the Senate also fought to make it better, which is what I'm very grateful for. We should all be grateful that senators in Texas are often forcing conference committees to restore these bills to a stronger version. So that happened with Senate Bill 13. Senate Bill 20 made it a crime to possess, create, or distribute child AI porn, which is a super sad reality that we are having to deal with now. HB 4623 ended indemnity of public school employees who commit sexual crimes against students. This was Mitch Little's bill that pierced the veil of sovereign immunity. And the Senate did weaken that bill a little bit through the committee process, but ultimately it still does get us toward the direction we want to go. And Mitch Little worked very hard to get that there. HB 100 adds instructional materials in public schools to things that the State Board of Education is going to have to look at and oversee. And this is incredibly important because what people were trying to do is say that the State Board of Education is just handling the curriculum, but not the instructional materials. And so Marxist teachers could just put all the Marxist stuff in the instructional materials and make sure that the textbooks are better and less inflammatory. They're not the textbook's not indoctrinating your kid. It's the instructional material that's indoctrinating your kid. HB 100 says we're going to give an elected Board of Representatives on the State Board of Education oversight over those instructional materials as well. Senate Bill 412 and HB 947 ended the exemptions of showing explicit material to children. So we have an exemption, a defense to prosecution for you to show explicit material to a child. And you might say, well, who gets to show explicit material to a child? One example would be a judge or a police officer. Okay. So a judge or a police officer might say, in the course of investigating a crime that happened against a child, we might have to discuss and present to this child things that could be considered explicit in nature, but it is due to the investigation we're doing to try to seek justice if this child was harmed in an inappropriate manner. So it makes sense that you go, okay, I understand why that judge and that police officer in that situation need a defense to prosecution if the parents turned around and said, I'm suing you for showing my kid explicit material. But another person on that list were teachers. All teachers. And why the heck a math teacher needs a defense to prosecution to be able to show explicit material to a kid, I don't know. Grassroots activists have been fighting for this for multiple sessions. And this session, it passed both chambers. Huge accomplishment. Kristen Bentley, Abraham George, all of these people at the Texas GOP that fought really hard on this issue for a long time. Well done.
Howdy, folks. It's Chris Salcedo from the Salcedo Storm podcast. You might know me from my TV show on Newsmax or my radio show on AM 700 KSEV in Houston. As a veteran broadcaster, author, and conservative political analyst, I've teamed up with Texas Scorecard to take a no-nonsense approach to the toughest questions Americans are wrestling with every day. Join me on the Salcedo Storm podcast, where I challenge the status quo and bring you fresh perspectives on the national, state, and cultural news. Tune in weekdays, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Senate Bill 2420 dealt with age verification for apps, making it harder for kids to download, making it impossible for kids to download apps that might have inappropriate material on them. All of big tech hated this bill. It was a great bill, yet another good accomplishment. So when it comes to the good things that happen for protecting Texas children and stopping the sexualization of kids, I would say we had a very successful session. Again, I'm going to talk about some bills that didn't pass that I think were obvious and easy, and there were disappointments this session as well. But largely when it comes to this issue, Texans should be very grateful that we passed a sizable amount of legislation. When it comes to election integrity, there were a couple things that happened. SJR 37 was the constitutional amendment affirming that only citizens should vote. I will just be honest with you and tell you, I don't believe that it currently was constitutional for non-citizens to vote in our elections. I just want to make that clear. I don't think it was constitutional. I think multiple places in the Constitution it says you have to be a citizen, but this just makes it even clearer. So that's good. It's not a bad thing that it passed, but I don't think if somebody comes back and says, I made it illegal for non-citizens to vote, I think it already was illegal. That's just my opinion. SB 1470 requires DPS to share data that will help clean up our voter rolls, which is a good thing. And probably the biggest election integrity victory of the session was SB 2753, which unifies early voting and election day into a single election period. This is an accomplishment, and this is something that Senator Bob Hall has fought for a long time. Again, one of those issues that if you start fighting for 4 or 5 years ago, you might eventually get, and Bob Hall was the driving force. But I will tell you, in the Texas House, they stripped this bill down to merely a study of what it would look like if we did that and brought it out. And then Representative Brent Money and Representative Carrie Isaac worked to restore this bill to the strong version that it had been in the Senate. They were able to mostly restore it, get it over to the Senate. It ultimately passed and is a very good step in the right direction. I told you this, protecting Texas children, ending the sexualization. I think more of the big stuff passed, with some bills failing. In election integrity, it was less victory on the election integrity side, with a lot of the more substantive bills dying. We had hoped that Representative Matt Shaheen was going to be a much better chair than Reggie Smith, because Reggie Smith killed all of the election integrity bills. He was a better chairman, objectively speaking. You wouldn't say he was a worse chairman, because Reggie killed everything, and Matt Shaheen only killed a lot of stuff. And so killing a lot of stuff makes you better than somebody who kills everything. So, but election integrity did see a number of important victories that I think are worthwhile. Securing the grid was a Texas GOP legislative priority. I will say this, we are still far too reliant on green energy for our grid. But Senator Bob Hall had a comprehensive grid security bill, Senate Bill 75 and HB 941. And then Senate Bill 2148 was the reliability of electricity supply chain, and HB 3809 was the removal of battery energy storage facilities. These were all accomplished and move us in the right direction of grid security. And I would say take more substantive steps towards moving us towards grid security than what we've had in past sessions. So kudos to Bob Hall, who's been working on this issue for a very long time. Huge accomplishments. Now, when it comes to ending federal overreach, there was the Texas Sovereignty Act, which took a slight step in the right direction towards identifying places that the state of Texas can stand up to the federal government. I think one issue that a lot of grassroots got very engaged in was HB 1056 by Representative Mark DeRazio. This was the Texas Transactional Gold Currency Bill. This is getting us to the point to where you can have transactions in gold. HB 1056. Florida signed this bill into law 2 days before it passed in Texas. So this is just starting to pass in red states, which again is something we should be grateful for, because sometimes Texas is like the 25th red state to pass a Republican conservative idea. When we have lawmakers fighting for policies like gold transaction for Mark DeRazio, and we're actually one of the first 5 to pass it, that shows a move in the right direction for the state of Texas. We have to be grateful when we accomplish that. I'm just going to be honest with y'all. The grassroots and Mark DeRazio deserve a ton of credit, and Senator Brian Hughes, for the delivery of this victory, because you have to understand something. This bill hit hurdles multiple times. This bill should have legislatively died multiple times, and grassroots conservatives continuing to push, and Representative Mark DeRazio just being like a fullback running this thing all the way to the end zone, and Brian Hughes taking the lateral pass and going the rest of the way, was all a very coordinated effort, and something that could not have been accomplished without a lot of different people. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility was super and highly involved in this bill. The Texas GOP and the Legislative Priorities Committee on Ending Federal Overreach were all over the Capitol trying to push this bill. There was a huge push. So even if you weren't involved directly, you need to know these bills don't just happen in a vacuum. They don't just get accomplished because somebody came up with an idea. You file a bill and let's see if it happens. All of this pressure. And there were multiple times that everyone was told, this bill's dead. This bill's going to get gutted. It'll pass, but it's going to pass really weak. And yet it passed, and it passed in a strong form. The very last thing that this bill needed to do was concur with the Senate. And Representative Mark DeRazio got up to concur with the Senate. You have to understand that it had been gutted in the House previously. So the question was whether there was going to be a push to get it back to conference, because the banking lobby were trying to kill the bill. This would have been their last Hail Mary attempt to try to kill the bill. And there were like dozens of Republicans at the back, Mike, just ready to have this fight because they knew this thing is on the 2-yard line. We just need to get this win. And we got it. So congratulations, Mark DeRazio. Congratulations, Senator Brian Hughes, and everybody else who pushed these important bills. We got a bill passed that Senator Phil King filed last session and filed again this session, that they killed last session, and we passed this session, which says, and if we had passed it last session, by the way, Texas would have been the first state in the union to do it, but then Louisiana did it before us. We are putting the 10 Commandments back into Texas classrooms, and here's how it works. If you deliver, it has a certain set of criteria, but if you deliver these framed pictures of the 10 Commandments, then school districts are required to just take those and display them in Texas classrooms. So it doesn't require them to spend money on it, but it says if somebody gives these to you, you have to put them up in the classrooms. I think this is a huge accomplishment. And SB 11, which kind of goes in tandem with that, created a time for prayer and the reading of the Bible and other religious texts. It says the Bible and other religious texts. And this is another very positive bill where teachers are going to be given the freedom to say, hey guys, we're taking 5 or 10 minutes in our class. And if you would like to pray or you would like to read the Bible, you can do that. And you can actually make this part of the period of time in which they're in their class. It doesn't say you have to mandate it, that every single student has to read the Bible for 10 minutes. And Democrats were freaking out. I liked this bill. I liked it more the more Democrats argued about it. I thought it was a good bill. And then Democrats were like, well, I think that teachers can give kids extra credit if they read the Bible. I think they can give them a little extra credit on their test or quiz if they spend the time in prayer. And I was like, that's awesome. Let's do more of that. If we put the 10 Commandments, the prayer, and the Bible back in schools, which I would say this session, we got the foot in the door on all those. And if the 10 Commandments are displayed, that's not a foot in the door. That is the 10 Commandments in the schools. Huge accomplishment. Texans should be very grateful that our public school system not only kicked a bunch of DEI and sex and gender theories out, but got the 10 Commandments and the Bible back in. These aren't small. There's a reason Democrats were super ticked when these bills were passing. When it comes to the issue of abortion, there was a bill passed that banned abortion travel reimbursements from taxpayers. And this is what we have with the city of San Antonio that I'm in and other liberal cities that are basically saying we will set up funds to pay for people to go murder their children out of our state. And that is atrocious. It is disgusting. And it passed. There was other pro-life legislation that died, which we will talk about later. But it is important to say that, yes, the abortion travel ban also passed. And I will also say this, Senate Bill 8 was the 287G bill. This is the best immigration bill that passed this session. And I do want to give it some adequate time to explain this process. So this bill will not be great policy if we have a Democrat president. So I will explain that. I think Representative Hopper has said that really well. This bill is great if you have a Republican president. This bill does nothing if Joe Biden or somebody like Joe Biden is president. Because what the 287G bill does is it mandates that these counties all across the state participate at some level in the 287G program. They could do the jail model. They could do the task force model. They could do various models. And what these models would mean is that when somebody comes into your jail, if it's the jail model, then you have to run this through the federal database. And if there's an ICE detainer hold, oh, this person's illegal. We know this person's illegal. You have to hold the person. You turn them over to ICE. You actually participate with the federal government in helping facilitate these people being returned to their home, which is not in the United States. The 287G bill is a very essential bill for the state of Texas to continue to coordinate with the Trump administration in successfully executing the largest deportation in history. Now, the bill, when it passed out of the Senate, was limited to only certain counties. It was not a statewide program. When it came to the House, it was expanded to being a statewide program, which I'm really grateful for Representative Spiller and Representative Louderback for working to expand this statewide. It was, however, only narrowed specifically to you're going to get reimbursed for the jail model. Okay. And what the Senate did when they went back into conference is that they expanded that and made it very clear that you could do the task force model and other models that the Trump administration thinks will be very helpful in executing their plan that they voted on. They're trying to fulfill the promise they made to the American people. And SB 8 is going to give the Trump administration more tools with local law enforcement to help fulfill their promise. And that is a good bill that passed. And it is a bill that got stronger every step of the way. It was good coming out of the Senate, but not as strong as it needed to be. It was even bigger coming out of the House, but also not as strong as it needed to be. And then the Senate made it even better again. So huge accomplishment for SB 8. And again, this is another bill when it came out of conference, Democrats were so upset because they knew it was going to be expanded to a statewide program as opposed to what had come originally out of the Senate. But they felt like when they narrowed it down to just the jail model, it was at least better for them than if every model was allowed under the 287G bill. And you might kind of like, what does that even mean? Just so you understand, the task force model is where a county sheriff and deputies could literally have an employee that goes out and identifies individuals who are here illegally and then gets them to the federal government to deport them. And as you can imagine, Democrats are just completely losing their mind over the fact that anybody that works for the government of the state of Texas or of a local county would actually participate in helping identify those here illegally and returning them to their home, which is the loving thing to do to that country. We want to take these people and give them back to the country that they came from so that they can contribute to that society. Really important. So that's the 287G bill. Again, there are other immigration bills that did not pass, but those are accomplishments. I will also talk quickly about two what I call partial accomplishments. One is the Texas lottery. So the Texas lottery should have gone away this session. It should not exist. It is the state of Texas basically saying we want to have a monopoly on a certain form of gambling that the poorest in our society will be addicted to. And then we are going to use this to get $1.5 to $2 billion from those people for the government, which, by the way, we then just turn around and give to those people in the form of free stuff. It does not make sense. It should not exist. There's been a lot of controversy about the lottery. The good news and why it's a partial win is that the Lottery Commission was abolished and the lottery operations were moved to the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. So the Lottery Commission was abolished, but the lottery was not abolished. And there were additional restrictions put on the lottery so that we have time to restrict what they can do and hopefully work towards the elimination of the lottery. The problem is that many of our elected officials are, and I think Mitch Little said this really well, addicted financially to the lottery. The government is addicted to the money. So it doesn't want to end this incredibly harmful program, even though we know it shouldn't exist. It's a partial win, but not the full win we needed. Another partial win is Democrat chairs. And I'm going to kind of explain why I believe Democrats not being chairman of the standing committees is a partial win. So when the Democrat chair issue started getting talked about, Republican speakers were literally appointing Democrats not only in powerful committee positions, but they were putting them on powerful enough committees to kill Republican policy, like Sinfronia Thompson chairing public health or Pancho Navarez chairing public safety which all the gun legislation goes through, and the abortion legislation goes through public health. So you literally had a Democrat chair over the abortion and guns. Well, that's crazy. So everyone now has to own this, and Republicans are going, well, why is a Democrat chairing the bills that kill all the abortion bills and the gun bills? So the fight is had. 2 years later, Democrats are stripped from those committees. That's why we're fighting, so that those committees aren't. But they still give Democrats chairmanships. They just take them off of the more substantive committees that deal with abortion and guns. And they go, aha, we've done enough. And we go, no, we don't want Democrats chairing committees. So then the next session, what Dade did was he reduced the number of Democrat chairs. He said, okay, well, I'm not getting rid of them, but I'm reducing the number of them that there are. Is that a good thing? Yes. Is that getting rid of Democrat chairs? No. But each of these things along the way have been partial wins to reduce the power that Democrats have. And I have talked extensively about Democrat chairs. Even when Democrats chair small committees, they still leverage that to punish Republicans. So this session, what happened was that they rewrote the rules to say Democrats can't chair standing committees, but they did a couple things that we're all rightfully frustrated with. They said they have to be the vice chair. They then gave the vice chair more power than the vice chair had ever had, does not have in the Senate. Gave the vice chairs a bunch of money, so millions of taxpayer dollars more are going to more Democrat staffers than have ever been hired before in any legislative session. And then they did create what are called these permanent standing subcommittees. And Democrats can chair those. And those committees basically operated like a committee. It is a subcommittee, meaning it's under another committee, but what we functionally saw is that they were essentially their own committees. So why do I say the ban on Democrat chairs is a partial win? It's a partial win because it is true that Democrats are no longer chairing the standing committees in the state, which is a lot of different policy that they don't have the full king or queen-like authority that a chair has. It is much easier and cleaner to know who kills your bills, and they are Republicans this time. So it's Gary Van Dever or Ken King or Angie Chen Button. The permanent standing subcommittee, in my opinion, is a bigger issue than the vice chairs. They're both bad, but I think them chairing the permanent standing subcommittees is worse than them chairing being vice chairs. And then them being vice chairs is not as bad as them being vice chairs with authority and a bunch of taxpayer money that they don't need. Anyways, that will come in the good and the bad and the ugly or whatever, but I just wanted to start by saying I do believe that the Democrat chair partial ban is a partial win. And that's not to excuse the gross violation they did when they forced the previous question and made sure that they didn't have to substantively debate the rules at all. It was horrible and horrific. And it was a giveaway of power to Democrats. And they knew they were giving away power to Democrats because the Democrats went on TV and said, we got a pretty good deal out of this. So they knew we were going to have to get rid of Democrat chairs, and that's because all of you made Democrat chairs such a big issue. We have to keep fighting to make sure Democrats have less power in the future, and we will talk about that in future episodes. But for now, we will conclude by saying that I did not just cover every single win we got. There are wins that we got that I haven't covered. I didn't have time to cover them. But I do think that you would agree with me if you listen to this entire thing, that Texans should be grateful that we accomplished a significant amount of conservative policy this session. And a lot of these policies were policies that were killed last session, and all of you complained about, and all of you unseated a lot of your Republican incumbents because they participated in creating the process that killed all this policy. So that the new conservative representatives who came fought to make sure that we were going to deliver something. And I think that something, as articulated over the last 45 minutes, has been something that you should be proud of and you should appreciate. And you should pat yourself on the back because you were part of it. And if you're not part of it and you just listen to this show and then go chill out and you're a bum the rest of the week, then do something. Become part of it. Join one of these organizations that are involved, sign up for a $10 a month donation, volunteer somewhere, show up to a local Republican club, a conservative organization, go block walk for a candidate who's running for office. Do something. Don't be a bum. And with that, may God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.